Hello everyone, I'm Prof. Brian and welcome to our travels through Genesis. We're going to be doing a little bit of Hebrew stuff and a little bit of other stuff. The Hebrew bit is for my students who are looking for a way to keep up with the language and stay fresh. So if you've finished your first year of Hebrew grammar and you want to review and practice, then you might want to pause the video at times to see if you can analyze some of the forms before I explain them. But we're also going to be looking at the structure of these stories and doing some general interpretation and reflection. So if you're not a Hebrew student, you may want to skip ahead in the video to the point where all of the English text has appeared and join the discussion there. So let's take a look at this text. We begin with Vayomer Adonai El Avram. Pretty straightforward. The Lord said to Abram. Then we have Lek Leka Me'artzeka Umemoladteka Umebeit Avika. So let's take a look at that first verb. It looks a lot like the following word because you have a lamed and then a kaf on both words, and those are the only consonants we have. But in the second case, it's the preposition lamed with the 2ms suffix. And in the first case, it's the verb. How did we get to this verb form? We've got no ending or pronominal suffix. We've got no beginning conjunction or preposition or imperfect prefix or anything like that. And we don't even see R1 because we've only got 2 letters there. So what's this from and what is it? This is from the verb halak. Halak thinks it's a first yod verb, or it behaves like a first yod verb. And if we had the imperfect form, we would have had telek. But we remove the imperfect prefix when we make the imperatives. So this is a kal imperative 2ms from halak. Get yourself from your land and from your family and from your father's house, or go from. El haaretz asher areka. Let's take a look at that verb at the end. The ka on the end, ka from ta, from ata, 2ms pronominal suffix. And at the beginning, we have aleph for our prefix, so that's 1cs. And then there's 2 different roots that we know that have a resh and an aleph. We know yareh, which is to be afraid, and we know ra'ah, which is to see. So ra'ah, it has a hey for the third radical in the dictionary, but it's a phony hey. It's not real. And it's gone here when we've added the pronominal suffix. What's going on with R1? Well, R1 has joined the prefix to make a pretonic closed short syllable, and the prefix has a patak. So we have maybe a little question here. The first radical is a guttural, so it could influence the aleph to take a patak, or we could have a patak because it's hifil. If we were theoretically trying to decide, do we have a hifil or a kal, and we couldn't decide by form, what would we do? We would count the number of direct objects that we have, because ra'ah means to see, and first of all, of course, in context, to the land which I see you wouldn't make so much sense, but the land is functioning as a direct object of the verb, and so is the pronominal suffix, and so we've got 2 direct objects rather than 1. So there's not I see the land, it's I make you or cause you to see the land. So to the land which I will show you. Ve'eseka lagoy gadol, and I will make you into a great nation. So we won't do all the pieces there, but you see the 2ms suffix on the end and the 1cs prefix here, the E-class vowel under the aleph. This is a kal imperfect, or at least it looks like a kal imperfect. Make a comment on that in a moment. Then we have va'arakecha, and again we have the 2ms suffix and we have a 1cs form, but what is the ID badge this time? What's going on with the syllable that the first radical is in? So the first radical is the bet, and it's got pretonic open long kametz there, and it's preceded by the aleph that has chataf patak, or we would say it's a composite shava. So we see shava under the prefix, an A-class vowel under R1, and then a guttural at R2. What ID badge does that come from? Well, it comes from the PL, where we would have shava, patak, dagesh. We can't put the dagesh in the resh because it's a guttural, so it's like it gets rejected, and that lengthens the previous vowel, so the patak changes to kametz. So a PL1CS. Now, is this an imperfect or is it a preterite? I see Vav Patak on the front. What does a preterite normally have? Well, it has Vav Patak Dagesh, but the Dagesh can't go in the Aleph because it's a guttural. It would be rejected, and so the Patak under the Vav should lengthen to a Kametz, and that has not happened. So this is a simple Vav plus an imperfect form, and it's got a Patak simply because of syllable principles, and it's matching it's getting the corresponding short vowel to the half vowel that it precedes. So I will bless you. Then we have Ve'agadala Shemecha. So now we have something that's very much the same but slightly different, right? So we have Vav Patak and no Dagesh because it's not a preterite, and it didn't have the rejection leading to the lengthening of the Patak to Kametz. We see the whole ID badge for the PL, Shava Patak Dagesh, but this time we have an ending. Now normally we start with the ending, but we wanted to emphasize the things that were similar between these two different PL prefixed verb forms that are 1CS. What we have on the end is a Kametz He. How do we know that that's not a third feminine singular suffix? Because there's no mapik in the He. So this is for the cohortative. We can't see cohortatives when there's pronominal suffixes there. So we might infer back to when we were parsing at this point that these are also cohortatives. Gadal in the Kal is a stative, to be big, to be large. This is a PL. What does the PL do to a stative Kal? Well, it is factative, that's the label we usually put on it, but it means that it's going to make the state described in the Kal come about for something. And here it is name, shame equals name. So I will make your name big. So that would be an idiom for I will make your name famous, I will magnify your name, I will promote your name, something like that. So I will make your name famous so that you will be a blessing. There we have Vehyeh Berakah. Now notice Vehyeh, this is not V'haya, right? It's not Vav plus a perfect consecutive in the Kal, like a Kal 3MS. If we had had the imperfect, then we would have had Tihyeh. And again, we've lost the imperfect prefix because this is an imperative form. And when we have a series of volitional forms, then Vav plus volitional can indicate purpose or intention or result. And that's what we have going here. I will bless you, I will make your name famous so that you will be a blessing. Then we have I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who belittle you. So again, we see the Kametz He of the cohortative on Va'avaraka, and then here we see the participle, and the mem is the thing that reminds us or signals us that we are dealing with a participle. Then in the next line, we have the participle first and the verb last. And this is actually the root that Kal comes from, the name of the Hebrew stem Kal, which is light or easy or little. Again, we have a PL, vocal shava patak dagesh, so to make little of you or to belittle you. Those who belittle you, I will curse. You might notice there's no Kametz He on this one. It's not a cohortative. This is a geminate root, aleph, resh, resh. It is Kal. That's signaled to us in part by the U-class theme vowel. And the reason we have an A-class vowel under R1 is simply because the syllable got opened up and it's now pretonic open long Kametz. It's no longer E-class because the vowel lengthened from short A to long A at a stage in the language before those short A's had switched and become short I. In any case, this is a geminate, and it's very rare to find a geminate root in the form of a cohortative. And then finally we have V'nivraku v'ka kol mishpachot ha'adama, right? And they will be blessed, In you, through you, by you. Who is the they? It is all of the families of the earth. So there's our text. And now let's step back and just look at the structure a little bit. This opening quotation from the Lord is the first paragraph of Genesis 12. And most of it is a quote. And it easily divides into two pieces based on the verbs, the subjects of the verb. So the first main verb is this 2ms form. Abram is the subject. He's told to go, and there's a bunch of modifiers. And there's so many modifiers that even though this is all one clause, I spread out the modifiers on separate lines just for display purposes. And then when you look at the main verbs in the second section, they're all 1cs forms. I will make, I will bless, I will make, I will bless, I will curse, all things that the Lord says that he will do. So it's pretty easy, just based on the verb forms that we have, to describe our opening paragraph as being a quote from the Lord with two parts. The first one is a requirement for Abraham, and the second one is rewards from the Lord. And these are things that are integral to the relationship between God and Abram. So notice the clever alliteration with the R's that we had there: requirements, reward, and the relationship. In the first part of it, if we go a little bit deeper, we see that we have three things that he is to go from, and then one description of what he is to go to. So on the one hand, he's asked to leave place and society. He's being uprooted from his home. He's being taken away from influences. And God is going to bring him to a place where he is dependent on the Lord and is relating primarily on the Lord, and is going to have a focus on the Lord. The Lord's going to be revealing who he is to Abram in his journey of faith. And then we have just a vague description of what he is to go to. It's the land that I will show you. We might say the end of chapter 11 kind of implies that it's the land of Canaan, but it's still vague. There's leaving a lot of stuff which is very concrete, tangible, and well-known, and going someplace which is somewhat unclear. That's a step that certainly requires faith, and it requires loyalty to the Lord. In the second section, where we see the rewards that God offers if he's going to take this faith journey, we can summarize those promises in three categories, or at least they're traditionally summarized in three categories. One is land, which is actually implied back here in the requirement section. The next is seed, which in this iteration of the Abrahamic covenant is referred to as making him a great nation. That implies there's going to be a lot of kids, a lot of descendants. And then blessing, and that's the part that has the most space here in Genesis 12. There's a couple of interpretive issues that show up here, and so we'll take a kind of a brief look at those. So I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name famous so that you will be a blessing. What does that mean, so that you will be a blessing? Does it mean the same thing that we have in English idiom? I say perhaps, you're a blessing to me. When I say that, I mean that I receive some kind of benefit from what you do, or just who you are, how you act generally in my presence. It makes me happy, it brings me joy, something like that. I say you're a blessing to me. But if we search our Bible and look for that kind of expression, we don't really find that expression in Hebrew. What would it mean then to be a blessing if it's not talking about being a blessing in that way that we're used to in English? Let's take a jump over to the Net Bible. The Net Bible has a note on this for us, and first let's even take a look that they've translated differently. They say, so that you will exemplify divine blessing. Now, we looked at the Hebrew, and there was just a verb for to be, and then there was a noun, blessing. What's going on? How did they get there? So I won't read through the entire note, but I want you to see the reasoning, right? Because they're looking for evidence, and evidence would be a similar construction in the language that is clear. So they bring us to some verses, Zechariah 8:13. Oh, that's really convenient, isn't it? And it will come about that just as you, this is referring to Judah and Israel, were a curse to the nations, so I will save you, and you will be a blessing. Do not be afraid, instead be strong. In which way, or in what way, were they a curse to the nations? Well, the note discusses that, and it talks about how they were cursed by the nations. There's a whole bunch of words that show up in our Bible that describes Israel in its exiled state as a punishment for her sins. They're a curse, a taunt, a horror, a reproach, a proverb, a laughing stock, and others. And when Israel is one of those things among the nations, it's talking about the way they are talked about by those people. They're cursed, they're laughed at, they're taunted, they're held up as an example of something bad. By inference, then, to be a curse, by inference, then, to be a blessing would be to be held up as an example of blessing. So, for example, in the book of Ruth, the elders bless her and say, "May you be like Rachel and Leah." So they use the names of people in an expression of blessing because those people are themselves a prime example of having been blessed by God. And so that's the interpretation that the Net Bible is taking here. Then another issue is here in the last line. So all of earth's families may be blessed through you. We're looking at the verb here, nivraku. It comes from barak, to bless. We saw that verb quite a bit here. But here it's in the nifal. And so we're wondering, is this strictly a passive use of the nifal, or is this a middle voice use of the nifal? Let's take a look at the nifal cases of barak in the Hebrew Bible. And wow, there's only 3. And they're all in formulas of the Abrahamic covenant. So that doesn't really move us to a new context to give clarity, so maybe it leaves us with a question mark. We're going to jump ahead a little bit and say, well, what about the hitpael of barak? And that's not used very many times either. It only occurs 7 times in 6 verses, and again, some of those are the Abrahamic covenant. But we do have a few cases that are outside of that context. Let's just jump to the bottom of the list. Here in Psalm 72:17, the hitpael of barak is used in this kind of reciprocal sense. Let men bless themselves by him, by the name of the Lord. Jeremiah 4:2, same thing. The nations will bless themselves in him, or use his name in the blessings that they pronounce on each other. And that is how the Net Bible has understood the hitpaels of barak in the Abrahamic covenant. So here in Genesis 22, all the nations of the earth will pronounce blessings on one another using the name of your descendants. Now, again, that's not like a wooden word-for-word translation. They're trying to capture the essence of the verb in the hitpael, and they spell it all out in the translation. Whereas the NAS had, in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, and treated the hitpael like a straight passive, which it's not. We would have looked for a pual in that case. So one of the questions that we end up with when we're trying to decide what to do with the last line of this is whether this nifal is doing the same middle voice reciprocal job that the hitpael does, because those two stems have some overlap potentially in their meaning, or whether the nifal is chosen distinct from the hitpael because it's doing something different. And the context could actually influence us either way. If we have understood 2D, that you will be a blessing to mean you will be an example of being blessed, that would go right along with saying all of the earth's families will pronounce blessings in your name, right? Using you as an example when they give the blessing. On the other hand, if we look at the first part of verse 3, I will bless those who bless you. That would be a mechanism by which all of Earth's families are blessed, passive sense of the nifal, through you. So we could point to things that would go different directions. You can see the way I've handled the translation here. I've treated the nifal as different from the hitpael and kind of linked it back here to the closer context. But it's completely possible that the other would be the case. There's a lot of discussion on this in the literature. And I think even the Net Bible has gone back and forth on how they've handled it. One more interpretive question for this passage comes from the relationship between the first verb, the imperative to Abraham to go, and then all of the promises that are made. Is going from his country a condition upon which the covenant rests? On the one hand, there's kind of this logical thing that if he doesn't go from his country to the other country, he will never receive the land that is promised. But let's just deal with this broader issue of conditional and unconditional covenants, because perhaps you've heard them described in this way. This description came about when we were finding treaties and covenants from the ancient Near East and looking at the nature of them and the ones that had stipulations. And then there were others that seemed to be a land grant that didn't require anything of the vassal. And so there was this description that there were conditional covenants and unconditional covenants, and this was overlaid on the interpretation of covenants in Scripture. As we found many more treaties and covenants and land grants, however, it turned out to be a much fuzzier boundary than had first been thought by scholars, to the point that we now know that you can describe the exact same event either with a conditional covenant or with an unconditional covenant, so-called. And if you want to pursue this more, you can check out Tony Shetter's dissertation from Dallas Theological Seminary. He dives into this. There's, for example, a covenant at Alalak in Syria where we have two different descriptions of it in the cuneiform record. And in one of those descriptions, there are stipulations or conditions that are given, and another one there's not. And it just has to do with the setting that the texts are being used for and whether or not they need to be mentioned. We could also point out that logically, all covenants or treaties are requiring loyalty from the vassal, the servant, the person in the lower position. Even when a land grant is made without the mention of ongoing conditions, and it's just a reward for past loyalty, there's the expectation that that person continues in loyalty. It would be just kind of silly, if you think about it, to think that a suzerain is going to grant territory or cities or land to a vassal, and then if that vassal decides to form a rebellion, that the suzerain's not going to come and take all the benefits away because they're in violation of the assumed nature of allegiance. And so that's true throughout the biblical covenants. All the different forms of the Abrahamic covenant that we see in the book of Genesis, we can sort of take as different iterations of one thing. They have more stipulations stated in some places than in others, but there's always this underlying value of allegiance or loyalty, and that, of course, is the driving thing for a relationship with God throughout the Bible. So the first paragraph in Genesis 12 is our first step in our journey through the book of Genesis. It set up these important themes of land, seed, and blessing that are going to keep being important for many, many chapters to come, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the next paragraphs.